Today we're talking about something every foreigner living in or even visiting the Philippines needs to understand. What rights do foreigners actually have here? And perhaps just as important, what rights don't they have? Because one of the biggest mistakes foreigners can make is assuming that just because something is legal or protected in their home country, exactly the same rules apply here. The Philippines is a sovereign country. If you're a guest here, you are expected to respect Philippine laws, customs, and culture. And there are certain things foreigners can do, and certain things that they absolutely should think twice about doing. I'm Mike. Welcome back. If you're new here, please give this video a like, subscribe to my channel, leave a comment, and share this video. Also, don't forget that bell notification. All right, let's get into it. First, let's talk about some basic rights that foreigners have. If you're legally in the Philippines, rest assured that you have important legal protections. For example, foreigners are generally entitled to due process of law. If you're accused of a crime, you don't simply lose all of your rights just because you're a foreigner. You have rights under Philippine law, including the right to legal counsel and the right to be treated according to the law. Foreigners also have constitutional protections involving things such as freedom from unreasonable searches and seizures and the right to due process. But there's an important distinction here. Having legal rights does not mean having exactly the same legal rights as a Filipino citizen. That's where things can get interesting. One of the biggest differences involves politics. Foreigners do not have the same political rights as Filipino citizens. A foreigner cannot vote in Philippine national elections, and foreigners generally cannot participate in Philippine politics in the same way that Filipino citizens can. There are restrictions concerning foreigners engaging in political activities and certain forms of political advocacy or participation. If you're American, Canadian, Australian, British, or citizen from another country living here, don't assume that your foreign citizenship gives you the right to participate in Philippine political affairs exactly the way that you would back home. And this brings me to something I hear foreigners talk about all the time. Can I criticize the Philippine government? This is kind of a gray area. The Philippines has freedom of speech protections. Criticism of government is not necessarily a crime just because the person making the criticism is a foreigner. But that doesn't mean that you have unlimited freedom to say or do absolutely anything that you want. There are laws involving such things as libel, cyber libel, threats, incitement, public disorder, and other offenses. And immigration status is another consideration. If a foreigner repeatedly gets involved in activities that authorities consider threatening to public order, national security, or public interest, immigration consequences can become a serious issue. So my advice is simple. If you're living in the Philippines, you don't have to agree with the government, but you should be smart about how you express your disagreement. There's a big difference between saying, I disagree with this government policy, and making threats encouraging violence, spreading knowingly false accusations, or getting involved in activities that could violate Philippine law. Okay, so now let's talk about something that's not necessarily a legal issue, but can become a very serious social issue: disrespecting Philippine culture. I've seen my share of YouTube videos where foreigners come to the Philippines and immediately start telling Filipinos how everything is wrong. The traffic is terrible, or the food isn't as good as American food, or Filipinos don't understand customer service, or why don't they do things the way they do them in America? And sometimes the foreigner might have a legitimate criticism. But there's a difference between having an opinion and constantly insulting the country that you're living in. Remember something, you're the visitor. You don't have to love every aspect of Philippine culture. You don't have to agree with every tradition. You don't even have to like every Filipino custom. But if you're going to live here, showing respect will take you a very long way. And that brings me to another issue. Being loud and rude. This is something foreigners should pay attention to. In many situations, raising your voice doesn't make your argument stronger. It just makes you look aggressive. I've seen foreigners get frustrated in restaurants, stores, government offices, airports, and other public places and start yelling because they aren't getting what they want. That might seem normal to someone from a particular Western culture, but here it can make you look incredibly disrespectful. If there's a problem with your hotel room, restaurant bill, apartment, internet service, or government paperwork, you can complain, but you don't have to scream, and you shouldn't. You don't have to insult employees, and you don't have to embarrass someone publicly. In many situations, being calm and respectful will get you much further than being loud. It reminds me of a true story that I once heard about an American who was waiting in line at immigration at one of the Philippine airports. The line was moving too slow for him, and he became impatient, rude, and loud, and he started yelling. His behavior caught the attention of an immigration supervisor. He must have yelled too loud, or too long, or both. He wasn't allowed into the country because immigration blacklisted him. He was faced with having to find a flight back to the United States. Another important issue is property ownership. Foreigners can own certain types of property in the Philippines, but there are significant restrictions. For example, foreigners generally cannot own land in the Philippines the same way that Filipino citizens can. There are exceptions in special circumstances, including certain condominium ownership arrangements and situations involving corporations or inheritance. But don't assume that just because you simply arrive here, find a piece of land that you like, then you can put it in your name. That is not how it works. And this is one area where I strongly recommend getting professional Philippine legal advice before making a major decision. Another major area is employment and business. Being allowed to enter the Philippines as a tourist doesn't automatically mean you're allowed to work here. And being retired here doesn't automatically mean that you can start operating any business that you want. Depending on what you're doing, you may need appropriate immigration status, work authorization, business registration, permits, licenses, and tax registration. Don't assume that just because you're making money online, the Philippine rules don't apply to you. This is especially important for foreigners doing YouTube, consulting, online businesses, photography, real estate activities, or other income-producing work while physically located in the Philippines. You need to understand the difference between simply being a visitor and actually engaging in economic activity in the country. Another area foreigners need to understand is marriage and relationships. Being married to a Filipina doesn't automatically give a foreigner the same legal rights as a Filipino citizen. And having a Filipino girlfriend or boyfriend certainly doesn't give you ownership rights over their property. It also doesn't give you the right to control their finances, threaten them, assault them, or treat them as property. Philippine laws apply to foreigners when they're here, and some foreigners learn this the hard way. Domestic violence, threats, harassment, assault, and other offenses can have serious criminal and immigration consequences. Now, here's another big one. Don't assume that your embassy can get you out of trouble. If you're an American and you're arrested in the Philippines, The U.S. Embassy can provide certain consular assistance, but they don't replace the Philippine legal system. They can't simply walk into a Philippine jail and say, "Release this American." You're subject to Philippine law while you're in the Philippines, and that's something every foreigner should remember. You are a guest in somebody else's country. That doesn't mean that you're powerless. You have legal rights. You have protections. You have the right to due process. You have the right to seek legal counsel. You have the right to report crimes and seek assistance when you've been victimized. But you also have responsibilities. You have to obey Philippine law. You have to respect immigration requirements. You need to understand restrictions on political participation and land ownership. And you should respect people and culture around you. And finally, here's my biggest piece of advice. Don't come to the Philippines expecting the Philippines to become America, Canada, Australia, or Europe. If you constantly compare everything here to your home country, you're probably going to make yourself miserable. The Philippines has its own laws, has its own culture, it has its own customs, and it has its own way of doing things. And that's one of the reasons many of us came here in the first place. You don't have to agree with everything. You don't have to pretend everything is perfect. And you absolutely have the right to have your own opinions. But there's a difference between having an opinion and being disrespectful. So if you're a foreigner living in the Philippines, remember this: know your rights, know your limitations, obey the law, respect the culture, keep your temper under control, and remember that you're living in someone else's country. Because if you do those things, there's a good chance that you're going to have a much better experience here. And that's what living in the Philippines should be about. Not trying to change the Philippines into the country that you left behind, but enjoying the country that you chose to come to. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and leave a comment below. And I'll catch you in the next video. God bless and peace out.